Hi, kia ora, and welcome to Creative Connections, where we have beautiful, inspiring conversations with artists living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. Lucy Eglington is a painter originally from the UK who immigrated to Aotearoa in 2003. She works from her home studio in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. Working primarily in oils, Lucy's paintings explore human states of mind, dreams, successes, losses, grief and love, and the narratives we tell ourselves. She often uses animals to represent ideas and feelings, and to add individual narratives to each work. With a successful track record of sell-out shows and recognition in art awards, her works resonate with audiences around the world. In this episode, we have a gorgeous chat about the ideology behind Lucy's work, the way she uses animals, and what they represent to her. We also talk about what she's communicating, how she wants the viewer to reflect on her work, her love of portraiture, her creative process from sketching and note-taking to filing ideas, and her painting approach. We have an uncut video of this chat, which will be available soon on our YouTube channel, Creative Connections, which is currently under development. This will contain images of the work that we're talking about and could be a really fantastic resource for art teachers, artists and other interested creatives, and for people who just love to watch instead of listen. This is a lovely chat I know you're going to enjoy. Sit back and relax. Kia ora, Lucy.
Kia ora, Mandy.
It is wonderful to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you very much for agreeing to come on. I think we've had a couple of aborted attempts, so here we are finally.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah,
so
great.
You were born in the UK and came out to New Zealand early 2000s.
Yes.
So you've
correct.
been here for nearly 25 years.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood in England and then why you came out to New Zealand?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in England in a little sort of village, actually, sort of outside the town of Bath. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I've been there.
So it was very sort of beautiful and idyllic, and I was very lucky to have grown up there. And we had a great big garden. Used to spend a lot of time in the garden, kind of daydreaming under trees and crawling around in hedges and generally sort of living in my imagination, I think, probably. So I think the emphasis was always on kind of making things, and play came from within rather than from without. We didn't have a lot of toys and things like that, and we were sort of encouraged to make our own toys and things. It was probably quite an unusual upbringing, I would say, compared to most people. I think it was kind of interesting and has probably added to my diversity of interest that I now have as an adult.
That's right. And I imagine that you're, being able to sort of explore your imagination is, you can see that in your work now, that sort of, that world that you've created in your mind has sort of come through into your practice.
Definitely. And I think, my mum was a literature. She did sort of English literature and taught English literature for a long time. And so we always had amazing books around the house, and she read to us a lot. And we were very, very fortunate to have been exposed to all the kind of wonderful children's authors, but she was also very interested in art. So we had, beautiful illustrations around, and the kind of Arthur Rackham and those sorts of people, and the kind of fables and tales that kind of make up the narrative of childhood. And I think because I was quite a sort of dreamy, imaginative kind of person, I think they were never really that separate from my reality. And that's obviously come into my work now as this kind of overlay of your kind of imaginary self combined with the realities of your daily life.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, how far back it actually goes?
I think it does. And I think those narratives that you form in childhood are unshakable. And I think they're sort of fundamental to who you become as an adult. And I think they're sort of, obviously you have the narratives of your kind of health and well-being and around relationships and all those sort of psychology building narratives, but I think on the other side, you have the kind of narratives of hope and joy and dreams, and I think those are just as unshakable, but they're not perhaps talked about as much as the
Yeah,
ones that then sort of go on to affect your daily functioning.
that's right. It's so true. So
Yeah.
at high school, were you sort of realizing that you could draw and you could paint? Was that starting
Yeah,
that
yeah.
early?
Yeah, I certainly was very fortunate that I had an ability to kind of see and put down what I saw, and so I was able to kind of be good at art at high school. But I had a horrendous art teacher who somewhat put me off.
Really?
Rather unfortunately, who I used to sort of I was a bit outspoken at high school and a bit of a sort of rebel. And the teacher used to do a thing which I used to hate, which was that he would get everybody's work and sort of grade it.
Oh my
And he would
God.
line it all up in a row along the wall about sort of whose was the best and whose was the worst.
Oh
And
no.
I know I really took issue with that and was quite loud and vocal about it. And mine was usually, I'm not being immodest, but it was usually the sort of best one or the better one. And so I was probably one of the few people who kind of could say, yeah, I used to sort of have a lot of head-to-heads with my art teacher, which
Mm,
put me off a bit.
I bet. But that is
That's
such an unusual, sort of inappropriate thing to do, isn't it? I wonder what he was actually hoping to achieve.
I don't know. I mean, I went to a kind of private school, and I think it had a lot to do with that awful kind of public school. Sorry, they call it public school, but a lot to do with the system and the way that it operates. And I just didn't fit into that system. And so I didn't take up art until I was in my mid-30s.
Really?
It put me off a very long time, and it just made me into an art lover and a visitor of galleries and museums and kind of backseat artist. But
Wow. Isn't that sad though? I mean, I just wonder what, I mean, you've still made a successful artist career,
thank you.
but you just wonder, I wonder if he hadn't influenced you in that way, what might have happened or how that could have changed the path of your young life.
Yeah, I think things would have been very different had I not had such a negative influence.
Mm,
You're so tender as a teen anyway, and your self-esteem and all of that stuff is so fragile. So yeah, it would have been interesting had I taken a different route.
yeah. And
I guess
I just
more than
love
it.
that you could see the injustice and the sort of inappropriateness of it, even though you were one of his favored. Your
Yeah,
work was often valued by him for whatever reason. But I love that you still felt very uncomfortable with that, almost
yeah.
on behalf of others.
I think I did. I was quite sort of self-righteous, um, but I used to get bullied a lot. So I think I probably really kind of hated the idea of people being put above or beneath other people
Mm, mm,
on the basis of something that they had done, and particularly something like art, which is just so vulnerable and kind of personal. I
yeah,
found that to be quite despicable because it seemed like a real judgment of the person as a human being rather than just their ability to produce things that look like things.
yeah,
Which in many regards is the smallest part of art, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Interesting. So where did you go after school? What was your sort of,
Um,
what were you doing in your 20s?
so I went off to university and did kind of earth sciences. So I'm very interested in kind of science and ecology and things like that as well. So I went off and did that, and I had also done a lot of traveling. So I was very into going to places, backpacking, and kind of just seeing what the world would kind of throw up at me. Um, so I went to university, and then I had been traveling during that time. I think just as I was finishing my degree, I went actually to Indonesia, and I got very ill. I got typhoid,
Oh,
and had
really?
a sort of crazy experience of being hospitalized in a sort of mission run by nuns in the middle of kind of what was then quite unexplored Indonesia. So, and that kind of derailed my life quite a lot. And then I got back and ended up working as a sort of marketing assistant, which I was actually quite rubbish at. I was terrible at it. But I think because I'm well spoken and kind of cheerful and I have this quite strong English accent, I think they thought, oh yeah, she'll be good, you know. So I did that.
She's a little bit posh.
I sound like I'm posh because my parents were highly educated and so was I, but I'm not. I don't have the attitude that goes with the sound, you know. So I just,
That's funny. But it served, served you well, obviously.
well, yeah, I think
Then.
it probably, yeah. I mean, in
Yeah.
some ways, I think it probably has. And I ended up spending 2 or 3 years kind of all around the world and having all kinds of crazy jobs. I ended up as a diving instructor on a boat on the Great Barrier Reef, doing
Wow.
underwater photography and things like that, and doing travel writing and photography. I came back to England. Then I worked for Reuters doing that and managed a kind of online travel sort of magazine. So I was sort of slowly edging myself towards more creative
Mm.
things because they were the things that I found the most interesting. But the photography became really important to me and writing, and obviously travel. And so I sort of meshed them together. I think I've been a really lucky person, um, because all the things that I've sort of tried have I've been able to do them.
It's
And
worked.
and it's worked, yeah. And I felt like I could have pushed that further, or I could have pushed this further or that. Um,
Mm.
but kind of through not choosing. It's very easy to kind of go through your life and not choose and kind of wash up in a sort of cul-de-sac that doesn't really suit you, but kind of suits you. And so that was where I always ended up when I had to have a sort of office type job. But when I got into my 30s, I just felt like I couldn't do it anymore and I couldn't live dishonestly. And I felt as though I was doing a job that was, really involved in sort of trying to get people to want things that they didn't particularly need. And even though by then I was a marketing manager for a publishing company and I'm a big reader, so that felt like a sort of more noble strand of marketing, it was still not really me. And so
Yeah.
I started doing painting because I'd always loved and wanted to do that. So I started doing it part-time. And then I went and did that course that Matthew Brown taught, but it was way back when it was ArtStation.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and it was one day a week, and I just felt like me again.
That was like 2000s, not long after you arrived in New Zealand, is that right?
Yeah, so I was 30, I suppose I was in my mid 30s when I started doing that. So
And you're now
I'm
52?
52 now,
Yeah.
so whatever that is.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, and then I did the second year of that with Matthew and Catherine Stevens, and
Mm-hmm.
they were wonderful. And I think that really made me just think, oh, thank God, I've found my thing that makes me feel like me.
Really? Isn't that
And then
great though?
I went for, yeah, it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
How amazing. And so great that you got to that point where you're like, okay, were you actually thinking I want to make this my career? I need to do
Oh
a bit
yeah,
more learning.
yes, yeah. I sort of really thought I can't do this corporate thing anymore. I'm getting miserable. I was getting depressed. I was getting anxiety, and I just thought I've had enough of sort of living by what I think I should be living like rather than who I actually am. And
Mm.
so I did a real kind of U-turn, I think, because I got quite depressed and just thought, I don't want life the way it looks now. So I'm actually going to try and have a life that I really want.
Mm. And you felt
Um,
like you needed to do some more study.
Absolutely, because I hadn't, apart from school, I hadn't done an art, any art study, and that's actually, well, I suppose that's a lie because I'd been to endless museums and galleries all over the world, and whenever I go anywhere, the first thing I do is I go straight into the gallery, like all artists, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So it felt like coming home a little bit. It felt completely right and authentic, and
That's so beautiful.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah,
very,
great story. And I'm
yeah.
so glad that you discovered that and it sort of changed your life around to be the artist who you are today.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel, I mean, again, no, I feel incredibly lucky because I'm just lucky that the work that I want to make also happens to resonate with people who want to own the work. And so I'm, in a really fortunate position.
I'm really fascinated to know what your painting was like at that point, like those early days. Do you
Yeah.
see similarities and links with what you're doing now, or is it quite different?
When I started at Matthew Brown's,
Mm.
I think it was kind of technically similar. Like I try to paint myself sort of out of my paintings because I want to create this sort of credible situation that while it looks manufactured and I want it to look manufactured, I don't want my own self to be present. I mean, I'm present in it ideologically and stuff like that, but the actual marks then, anyway, I used to not want to have any obvious brush strokes or anything like that. So I made a lot of things that were kind of blended, very highly blended. I don't know why, but it was so kind of amorphous shapes that were kind of twisting and sort of turning into one another. And I used a lot of burnt umber and raw umber and white. And for the longest time, I think the first year I just spent making these kind of twisted, sort of bone-like white forms that would kind of turn into the darks and they would sort of curve into each other. A bit like, how you do your beautiful jewelry that's kind of made, with using shell forms as an inspiration. They felt a bit like shell and bone, but kind of abstracted extensions of those things. So they were all abstract, but they were quite sort of tightly painted. And they had come from, I think, probably the first artist that I truly sort of fell in love with, which was Georgia O'Keeffe's kind of bone paintings in the deserts of New Mexico. And I think I felt so overwhelmed by this world that I'd sort of thrown myself into. I think I just needed to start with something that was comfortable, and I was just going to kind of grab on that.
Yeah.
And just started doing those, and then they sort of looked a bit like bodies and a bit like bones, and then I started sort of slightly submerging them in kind of water, so there were kind of bits of them sticking out and bits of them sort of submerged. So they seemed like these sort of continents of kind of self. They had slightly monumental kind of quality to them in this, so they were forming landscapes, but they were kind of forming these quite barren, quite sensual kind of landscapes. And I think you can sort of feel it, I think, sometimes in my current work. Often I'll do a landscape that's quite empty and it has kind of quite rolly, sort of gentle kind of forms.
Were you starting to create those worlds sort of in your mind? Was that starting, were some of those narratives starting to develop in those early times, do you think?
Yeah. Yes, they were always there in my mind and they were always there sort of to be worked towards, but I think I perhaps didn't know how to begin to approach those things because you have all these kind of semi-abstracted lots of different strands of thought and you don't really know which one to kind of pursue, and nobody sort of tells you, oh, this is the one. You have to kind of poke around through your own internal filing cabinet and just start.
Yeah, yeah. And did you feel like being having the support of someone amazing like Matthew Brown and
Yeah.
Catherine Stevens? Do you feel like that was sort of the best way for you to start your career and to start really sort of formulating your ideas and developing your painting techniques? Do you think that was quite an important part of your
I
journey?
think so. Yeah, I think it was really important because they don't teach you how to paint at all, really. You sort of do that on your own, although they'll give you support with technical stuff if you're stuck. But yeah, they sort of, I think having the framework and being able to kind of go there every week and say, look, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? And learning how to kind of reference your ideas in a way that feels kind of safe and supported and non-judgmental is really important. And also having a peer group around you. So there were sort of 12 of us in the group, and actually to this day we still catch up and we still, some of us are still working, and that's I think that was really valuable because you got that sense that I'm on this journey and I'm on this journey with a whole lot of other people, and they're on obviously their own journey, but being able to kind of have people to reference with while you're on that journey was incredibly valuable, I
Yeah.
think. And
And
having Matthew and
that's your
Catherine,
community.
yes, yeah, yeah. And we were all kind of beginner artists in one way, but quite serious about it in another way. So we, none of us had the goal of kind of hobby painting. We all wanted to make art that felt significant to us and kind of meaningful, hopefully, to
Mm,
anyone else who might look at it eventually.
yeah. That's incredible. And did you
Yeah.
start just by thinking, I'm going to be a full-time artist? This is what I want to do. This is making me feel good. And did you have that kind of that self-assurance that that was going to happen regardless? Or did you find that, getting feedback and affirmation from those people and other people around you was what helped you kind of get going when you thought actually people do like my work?
The second one, I
Yeah.
think I would never have had the confidence or the self-confidence to have just gone, yep, I'm going to be a full-time artist. But I had this kind of secret, desperate hope, like we all do, that maybe one day I could, um, and that I would try very hard to get good at painting. In my head, I saw that as kind of the way in, and sort of having ideas that were felt like my own, and sort of having a voice. But I never thought, oh yeah, I can do this, because it's not easy.
No.
Um, but I am sort of eternally optimistic.
Yeah,
So,
but I mean, look at you, you're still going now. That's, more than 20 years ago.
yeah, sort of
Yeah.
optimism, wild hope, somewhat being irrational. You
But
know,
and plus talent. Yeah.
Thank you. I could sort of go, I want to make this look like how I want it to, and that I was able to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So from there, were you working full time from on your art from that course, or
Um,
how did it go from
no,
there?
no. So that I did that course while I was working full time, except for that one day a week. So sort of part time, full time, whatever that is. And then the company that I worked for got bought. I actually worked for Reed Publishing, and it got bought by Penguin, and a bunch of us got to be made redundant. So I got made redundant, which was fantastic actually, because obviously I got a redundancy payout, and I had been the
Yeah.
marketing manager, so the payout was quite reasonable. And so that sort of bought me a little bit of time. But then I started doing little bits of freelance kind of copywriting and things like that. So I sort of juggled doing that freelance work with doing my art. So, and freelance work, when in those days, sort of PR and copywriting stuff was really well paid. So I got
Mm. Yeah.
that.
Oh, that's
And
good.
then
That was a good transition in a way.
it was wonderful, actually. It was a really good gift from you
The
know
universe.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It
And
was,
so, what year was it when you actually devoted yourself to your art practice?
but basically I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then I was with a partner and I got pregnant with my son. And I think then I had my first solo show. So I painted my first solo show like all the way through my pregnancy. Um, and in what was then the Satellite Gallery, do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember the name. I don't remember ever seeing it. Yeah.
It was actually a great little gallery. It was kind of like an offshoot of the depot in Devonport, but it was much more sort of curated. And they had a kind of full-time person in there who was a kind of curator and really passionate about art. And that was a guy called Mark Canico, and he's a wonderful curator, and he was really passionate about my work. And yeah, I basically sort of, while towards the end of my pregnancy, I was really just doing that and doing that and doing that, and it hung. And then that week, my son arrived. So he was
Really?
early. I think I was sort of holding him in until I could get this thing done. So it felt like a great kind of creative endeavor, sort of growing this person and growing this first body of work. And so I was sort of lying in a hospital bed reading. I got a lovely review from TJ McNamara and Herald, and the show was a sellout, and I was really lucky with that. And then because I obviously had just had a baby, I wasn't doing much, and my then partner agreed with me that I could have some time off effectively to look after my baby, but also to do painting. So that again was a wonderful gift to give me the time to be able to both, have that time with my son when he was tiny and also kind of work on the other side of things. So
Yeah, and to sort of scratch that creative itch.
yeah, it was hard when he was little. And I think probably anyone who is an artist and also a mother will say this. I think that the sort of energy that's required to make art and kind of generate new ideas and kind of seems to be the same kind of energy that you use up when you're mothering. Obviously, the mothering tends to come first because it's your child and it's so important. So for I think the first year, I found it quite hard to make anything because it's just too much else going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, it's
Did
such
you
a
find that
tricky
with
time,
your?
isn't it?
Yeah.
You just imagine having a baby and it's like, oh, I'll have my baby and I'll be doing my art and it'll just be beautiful.
Yeah,
But
and it's
in
like sort of
reality,
draw for 8 hours a day while I'm in my studio. Yeah.
and while they're sleeping, I'll just make some more art and
Yeah.
yeah, and then you get to that point, you're like, actually, that's actually
That's
really hard.
such bullshit. Like it doesn't.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And your mind is never away from your child, even if you are physically away from your child.
Mm.
So
Yeah, it's actually harder than you imagine to find that headspace when you're a mum.
I think it really is, and I think, I mean, it's called maternal preoccupation, and it is a psychological phenomenon, and you don't really realize how it is until you
Mm,
are,
mm.
you know.
So that solo show and being so well received as well
Mm.
must have been quite a pivotal time, I suppose, in your career, and
Oh, it
then
was
that sort of
amazing. Yeah,
made you rethink what you were going to do.
it did. It really made me think I can do this, or not necessarily I'm going to be wildly successful, but I have the capacity to do this. And it was, I suppose, having had that success gave me the kind of internal justification to say, yes, I can sort of use this as justification myself to say I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to invest in myself, both in terms of sort of time and space. And while you're not painting for sales and you're not painting for other people, you're painting because you need to make the paintings. If you're trying to make a job out of it in a life, unless you've got some other source of income, you do need to have sales and you do need to have the work well received. And whatever people may say, it's wonderful to not need that, but actually I think that's not realistic,
Mm.
because who's going to pay the mortgage?
Yeah,
you know
it's part of it, isn't it? It has to be.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think it does. Yeah, I know
yeah.
there's Grayson Perry who said, and I don't entirely agree with this, but that somebody said, he was interviewing, what is art, and he said, and I think it was sort of trying to be disruptive as well, but he said art is what pays the bills. And I don't believe that is what art is, but it does. If you are an artist, you've got to pay your bills.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there is a line that you have to toe.
It's such an incredible practice, and I'd really love to hear you describe it sort of as an overview for people who have never seen your work before.
For me, it's kind of about the human condition and the narratives that we kind of have for ourselves as humans as we go about kind of living our lives. And so the first narratives in my mind are these narratives of kind of fable and fairy tale and kind of they have a slightly magical quality about them when you think back to your childhood. Has this kind of like dislocated, slightly weird kind of quality, but these narratives of kind of hope and dream and kind of loss and success and kind of giving and taking and things like that. They're all very well expressed through these, I mean, to my mind, it's kind of Aesop's fables being some of the first stories that you have, those little sort of ladybird books with kind of thing in
Yeah.
it. Where's my animals? And I kind of like the animals. Well, they're really specific. They're kind of universal. So a lot of the animals in these narratives are kind of loaded up with narrative. So if you use like a fox, for example, it kind of comes loaded up with this sort of idea that it's kind of wily and cunning and all these kind of things. And so I liked the idea of kind of building human stories about the things that go on in our lives using these animals as kind of representative of kind of states of mind, if you like.
Mm.
So sorry, that sounds a bit convoluted, but
No, not at all.
and when I did my first sort of group of work for that first show, it was about like when you're sort of sitting around living your life, there are moments where you make choices and you go one way or you go the other way, or you have an idea and you decide to go this way or that way, or you decide to terminate a relationship, or you decide to not take a job or take a job, and there are all these kind of paths that you could have taken or sort of not taken. And I like the idea that in your mind you are the summary of all these decisions and ideas that you've had and sort of dreams that you've had and dreams that you've had and haven't realized and dreams that you've had and have realized and kind of ideas that you've not done and done. And so the idea that they're kind of all around you, if you could see them made flesh, they'd be sort of slightly ethereal, kind of transient, sort of flighty little sort of creatures. So I had a series of, at that time, kind of often nudes or sort of people like that, kind of with these things made visible. So at that time I was using kind of butterflies and insects and moths and things, and they were kind of pinned on to the people's bodies. And the sort of larger hopes kind of realized and not realized. At that time I had gone into the museum and photographed a lot of animals that had these kind of tags, the stuffed birds.
Yeah.
With specimens of these birds that were kind of like these flighted, beautiful things that represented to me kind of ideas or dreams, that they were kind of frozen and stuffed into these boxes. And so if you ever go you can make an appointment and go, and you open up these kind of stacks and they've got all these boxes and boxes and boxes of these kind of frozen animals, and in particular these birds, like in mid-flight. And they're beautiful and kind of incandescent, but they've stopped. So they're kind of like frozen dreams, and they're labelled with these fantastic sort of old labels with this kind of all pencily sort of script on. And that's kind of how it started, honestly, going in there and seeing that, because it was like all these frozen possibilities, and they represent all these frozen possibilities. And so I started off using those and these kind of the idea of insects that have been kind of pinned and preserved. And then the insects and the birds became the kind of center of the narrative, and then they became kind of alive. So they themselves became the characters. So I was using all these birds as kind of agents of narrative, but they started kind of taking over and becoming the kind of central characters in the painting. So I had effectively had kind of nudes and human figures with all these other kind of things representing these frozen thoughts. But then I just started taking out the people, and they became their own kind of narrative stories, effectively. And then it sort of grew and grew from there. And I think the first one that I did that had just an animal and that was quite successful was a polar bear, and I had this and I'd called it Exhale, and you can see it if you go on my website. And I love the idea that the things you say go on to influence other things or other people, or again, they're like expressed thoughts and desires and dreams and hopes, and out they come of you and they sort of go off and have their own
Yeah.
lives, you know. Uh, And so I had done this polar bear, effectively sort of exhaling this big cloud of kind of moths and butterflies. And I really enjoyed making it because I liked the idea of the bear because it felt like this very strong figure, but at the same time, sort of terribly vulnerable and fragile. And they're the most ferocious thing I can think of, apart from, a shark, really. Um, whilst at the same time being kind of critically in trouble. And so you sort of, I felt a bit like it as a woman and as a mother and as all those other things that I am and was. And I made it for me. And I was very surprised when it was actually really sort of well received by other people. Um, and it sort of gave me the confidence to just continue just only making these creatures, which I was worried that because they were sort of animal paintings, that they would potentially be sort of cheesy. It's a fine line that I
Yeah.
walk because I make paintings using animals and I paint kind of animal narratives, that they could go easily into kind of cheesy territory or kind of whimsical territory, which I don't enjoy the idea of, because for me, they're not at all whimsical or kind of cute, or because they're talking a lot of the time about the sort of dark aspects of being a human and things like that. So
Mm.
when that was well received, but in a way that wasn't seen as kind of cute or too whimsical or anything like that, I thought, yeah, I can actually walk this line. It seems like a knife edge, but it seems as though I'm able to walk it.
Yeah. You can go there. Go
Yeah,
there.
so effectively, now that I've done all that huge and long waffle, my work is about telling human stories, but the stories of kind of our inner selves of hope and loss and sort of, whilst using the narrative of kind of fable and animals. And as a kind of extension to that, I often work in a style that is, to my mind, quite timeless, which is this kind of Renaissance influenced kind of style, because that's what I love. Um, and it seems to me that the Renaissance was a time in history um, where anything felt possible. And it was really interesting because, there were these, and sort of post-Renaissance, in that sort of 200-year chunk, let's say, from the 1500s to the kind of late 1700s, where it seemed like, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't if you actually lived there and you caught plague or something, but looking back on it, historically, and again, I'm deliberately not talking about the sort of colonial aspects of that time of history, because that was freaking awful and then some horrendous things were done by people to other people, and I don't want to touch on that in this conversation because that's not the aspect of it that I'm looking at, but I feel like it's important to mark and note,
Yeah.
just to have it said.
Yeah.
um so it was a time of kind of enormous discovery, and there was a kind of scientific revolution going on at that time, and it was the sort of birth of what they called the Age of Reason. And so there are all these people, and in particular people who sort of go off and explore, and this is much later, this is in the 1700s and things. So people like Joseph Banks and these sort of, and Darwin obviously much later, but they went off and they made these discoveries, and they were so extraordinary, these discoveries. Imagine seeing for the first time um an iguana or a hippopotamus or a lion or a manta ray or a seahorse. And it was this kind of time of like total possibility, and it was almost like these kind of mythical, magical creatures like dragons and things like that were thought to be real, because if a seahorse can exist, why can't a mermaid or quite,
Mm.
So it was this kind of really interesting time of extraordinary sort of possibility where almost dream and reality seemed to kind of overlay in the kind of public imagination. You know,
Yeah.
these explorers would come back and they would kind of present their findings to sort of lecture theatres full of people, and people were sort of ooh and ah, and there were these illustrations that they had kind of brought back. So in my work, and you can see it more distinctly, I've done some watercolors, which to my mind were kind of made almost like in the style of these explorers, where they had these kind of notebooks that they would fill with these quite beautiful watercolors, quite sort of painstakingly and kind of illustratively used,
Mm.
um, to depict these kind of things that they had found. So I'm in my mind, I kind of sit between this kind of Renaissance period and this kind of age of discovery, you know, inverted commas, presenting back to the world these sort of human narratives of our lives and of hope and of despair and of things like that, and of people and the way they treat other people, and but
Mm.
using this vocabulary of this kind of age of where people's kind of subconscious kind of overlapped with the conscious. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Absolutely. Yeah,
That's
it's really fascinating. I mean, it's quite a complex sort of base that you work from in some ways.
it is.
How when you approach a new painting,
Yeah.
how what are you thinking? Are you thinking I want to represent this kind of emotion, or this is something that I've experienced that I want to kind of unpack it visually, or you know, how do you sort of build the narrative from the
I
beginning
know what
before
you
you
mean.
even
Like,
start? Yeah.
where does it come from? Both. Sometimes it will be a situation that I want to unpack visually. And sometimes I will think of an image and it will strike me somehow, and then I will, something about it will strike me, and then I almost have to understand why that struck me, if you know what I mean. And then
Yeah.
okay, I really like the idea of using this image, and then what can I do then to add to the narrative to make it, you know, how can I, what do I need to include in the picture? How do I construct this image in order that it fits the narrative of my work?
Yeah. And are you
Sort of,
thinking, have you got like a bit of an idea to start with your storytelling basically, and then you start sort of building as you add characters to your painting?
yeah.
Are you building the story?
One of the things that I'm quite interested in is the sort of Greek myths and the idea of Prometheus kind of stealing fire. Um, and then I liked the idea of an animal with its tail on fire. Um, and I had recently been in Japan and been to all those beautiful temples where they have all those Inari temples with all the foxes with the flames, but the flames there are not on their tails. But in my mind, it sort of somehow turned into this sort of the idea of a creature with its tail on fire. And I love the dichotomy inherent in that. And in the painting world, you can sort of say, oh, that's, is it, you know, you can apply your lift and go, oh, it's going to get burnt and it's going to hurt. But at the same time, in this kind of magical space of creation, you know, it just sits there with its tail on fire. But I love the idea that, you know, we're all in life with our tails on fire,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and we're carrying around this extraordinary thing, but at the same time, they're often kind of like the seeds of our own destruction. And you know, and I like the analogy that we're sort of, you know, your life is a certain amount of time, and then you're not in it anymore, so you're like a kind of burning wick.
Yes, so true. That's a great
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah, so I really love the idea of that, and so I kind of wanted to have an animal with its tail on fire, but I liked the idea of the animal kind of doing its life at the same time. So in this painting, it's a leopard. It will be when I finished it. Anyway, it's coming. to drink and possibly eat or hunt with its tail on fire. So it's I like these kind of closed loops of stories which can be seen from either direction. And I
Yeah.
really like that because I think life is like that. And I think there's this kind of dichotomy present in everything we do. So, he's coming down to drink and attracting the fish with the fire on his tail, and the fish is seeing the fire and thinking that it might be food or not, whether it provides some other form of nourishment. I I don't answer that question. I like to raise the question, because I think that you don't need to answer that question, because the asking of the question is kind of how we live our lives. Because
Mm.
life is one big long sort of question, really, isn't it? And
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
this thing that I'm doing going to hurt someone else? Is it to my advantage? Is it to my disadvantage? Often it's both.
What's
Um,
going to happen as a result of this and all
yeah,
those questions? Yeah.
exactly. And whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage often depends on how you look at it, and whether you look at it through a lens of kind of hope and wonder, or through a lens of kind of cynicism. is
Yeah.
it's up to you. And I think that I want my paintings to kind of reflect that idea that you can choose how you look at this situation, and depending on what frame of mind you're in, you might choose to look at it differently. So sometimes people look at my paintings and think, oh, that's horrendous and horrible because that thing is going to happen, and someone else will look at it and think the exact opposite. And I think that's life.
Yeah, yeah. And
And I
that's where your paintings are really connecting
thank you.
with humans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's why I want them to that's where I want them to sit on this kind of weird and tenuous,
Mm.
kind of almost like dichotomous line.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
do you feel like you'd like to give the viewer a little bit of that background information, like the fact that it's started with thinking about a myth or a fable, or do you like to give a little bit of a clue, like sometimes you do with your titles, or do you like to
That's
keep it
fine. Yeah.
quite
I
open?
I don't want to tell the viewer what side of the line to fall on, because I think that there isn't a side of the line in life, and I like the idea that they keep open. You never know the answers, and maybe you do in the moment of our deaths, or the who knows? Because even things that go terribly wrong can lead on to other opportunities that you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily have known about. I hint. I mean, sometimes I do. Like I did a painting which I had called Prometheus, which was these sort of foxes going up a hillside, having kind of stolen the fire. Um, so that was a direct kind of nod to that. And I do,
Mm.
um, like I had a painting of a falling woman sort of grasping at birds to sort of grab their feathers, and I had called that the dream of Icarus. Um, and you're sort of not quite sure if she's in sort of blissful surrender or in fall, or
Mm.
because again, that's the line I like to sort of try to sit on. Um, so sometimes
Yeah,
that's a bit
it's
vague.
fascinating. It's
Yeah.
just it's so fascinating that you have all these incredible stories in your head. I mean, do you do a lot of reading and sort of learning about things or learning about stories to that sort of inform your thoughts, or do you just have this incredible imagination?
I think it's in there anyway. So I don't tend to do, I don't sort of sit there and read them in a I must inform. It's more like I enjoy hearing them and reading them, and then they kind of come back to me in other shapes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I go, when you're sitting in the car driving or whatever, and you have an idea, and then you relate it. And I suppose that's how art's made, isn't it? It's these connections and you're trying to
Mm,
make visible.
yeah, yeah. And
So
so do you have all these ideas sort of popping into your head? I imagine at night time sometimes you know, get an idea if you're wakeful, and so
yeah,
how do you manage all of these ideas and how does it become a painting?
Yeah, because my head is a very sort of jumbly environment. So I scribble them down on anything. Um, and I have endless sort of sketchbooks full of scribbles, but I also sometimes will write them down on my phone in that notes thing or speak them. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I don't want to put the light on, I say them into the phone. And sometimes that's terrible because you wake up and you think, oh my God, stupid idea. You know how when you wake up and you think you had a genius moment and it's
Yeah.
absolute bollocks. So that happens quite a bit. Yeah, no, I scribble them anywhere and everywhere. And then every now and again, I sort of go through all little piles of kind of scribbled information and I kind of gather them up into kind of folders. So here's one. It says, and then I label this like ideas semi-refined.
Wow. Oh
And
my
so
God, I am loving this. This
this
is
is,
this is this is the good thing about being on video. Hopefully people listening will be able to find this on the video on YouTube at some point. But it's so nice to actually see your studio and to have it recorded and then to see, your actual parts of your process.
thank you. Yeah, I kind of didn't want to, because, often people will present their kind of manufactured artist persona. And I don't want to do that because I would like this potentially to be valuable to some up and beginning artists and to see that actually I'm a disorganized person. I'm very disorganized, but there is a way of kind of muddling through it.
Yeah. You've found your,
Yeah,
your
and
system that works.
yeah, so I have endless ones of these, and a lot of the time the ideas are written and not drawn. Um, so they're here. These are all scribbled on sticky notes. They're
Wow.
they're. I mean, it's pretty chaotic in here.
That's
Um,
amazing.
they're not realized at all in terms of their sort of physicality. Then I make them up into kind of slightly more refined ideas. And there's a kind of note about how I want it to feel on the back. Martin Johnson Heed, because he was, an interesting painter and I liked his kind of natural history kind of representations and so
Mm.
um and then I've written notes about how I want it to kind of feel and the energy that I want it to kind of have and the way I want it to come across.
Do you see the actual final painting in your head? Are you sort of visualizing that as well as the
Yes.
actual ideas behind the story?
Yeah. So that I think they probably sort of come simultaneously because you kind of have the idea, and it often starts off with a central that I think would be visually really poignant, like an animal with its tail on fire, and then you kind of see how that would be and what it represents to you as a human and what in the context of my existence. So the other kind of characters, if you like, if you want to call them that kind of become obvious to me because I think, oh, that's about fear, and so I want to represent fear, or I want to represent acquisitiveness, or I want to represent, whatever it is I want to represent, and I don't know if you experience this. So when you're thinking about right, and what's right, when it's right. It just feels right.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm sort of running through a kind of mental index of ideas. And then when I hit on one that I think, oh yeah, that feels right for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I tend to go with that because it
Mm.
will have fit the ideological narrative. And if it doesn't, then it has to go out because obviously, it, you
Mm.
know, it doesn't
And is
meet.
it reflecting, I mean, we sort of touched on this before, but do you feel like it's reflecting your life at the time as well?
Often, yeah, often they do. Yeah, they really do. And
Mm.
situations that I'm currently in, or have been in, and I'm kind of trying to process, or something like that.
Yeah. And do you see yourself as some of these animals, or do you see some of the animals as yourself?
Yes, in my mind, I think actually they're aspects of our personalities, if you like. So I am not an animal, rather in this thing, I am.
Yeah.
This represents the sort of fearful state, or this kind of way of being, or
Yeah.
the relationship that is being created by these two animals. This one is how I feel.
Yeah.
sort of thing. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I get that.
if
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yes, I
Um,
do. And
yeah.
the symbolism of animals is, I mean, animals have always been quite strong symbols in
Yes.
themselves, haven't they?
Yes. Yeah.
Like you were saying with the fox and being cunning and wily. And I understand that, you're thinking this animal is expressing this feeling or this emotion, but out of all of the animals, how do you work out which animals are going to be characters in your story?
I know what you mean. Sometimes they feel right.
Yeah.
I suppose I would like to say I had some kind of like rigorous system but they just feel right. And I think there are some animals that are important to me, or inside that kind of narrative space are important to me because, I like badgers and foxes and bears and things because I grew up, not that they're bears,
Yeah.
but they were kind of part of my own narrative. Um,
Yeah.
Birds, because they're kind of beautiful and awkward at the same time often. And so I think those are quite interesting. Picture here of it's like a just thumbnails of all my work and sort of badges and things represent this kind of homely because we had them round at home.
Mm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, but occasionally I just use an animal because I really like how it looks.
Mm.
I think it's visually really amazing, and I'll sort of bend the animal to fit the narrative that I want it to have,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
So interesting. It's
Um,
such a fascinating practice, Lucy. I mean,
Thank you.
it's really interesting and complex, it feels,
It
the
is a bit.
narratives behind your work, but in the best possible way, you know what I mean?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I sort of think that you could look at it and think, oh, it's pretty or it's whatever it is, but I that's not my intention.
Mm.
But at
But
the same time,
sometimes the work that the animals that you paint are very beautiful and pretty.
yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
and sometimes you use birds like flamingos that have, that gorgeous pink.
Oh, yeah.
And you are thinking about sort of using color in a way that sort of is attractive, I suppose, but
I think
also
so.
creating that contrast, which I love.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I think there is room in art for beauty. And I know that's kind of a dirty subject, but uh, I, sometimes you are painting and you think, I want to, God, all those reds, and get all those cadmiums out how do you darken a red? You can't darken a red with a dark color. You have to darken it with a darker red, and
Yeah.
just enjoying the doing of the painting of some things. Sometimes
Yeah,
because I want to paint them,
absolutely. And
but
as you say, there's nothing wrong with that.
no,
And do you feel, even though, you have references to sort of quite classical painting techniques and a period of painting, the
yes,
Renaissance, but also thinking about the scientific aspects of some of your themes and all of that, it feels like there is quite a lot of academic sort of thinking and research and reading behind what you
yes,
do. But then
yeah.
I also feel in some ways that you don't want to be too academic. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. It's interesting because, and sometimes I paint in quite an illustrative way. And that's quite deliberate because I want them to feel kind of a little bit storybookish. But yes, there is also this academic, I like the idea of my painting practice having a kind of intellectual rigor to it so that it's kind of substantiated and I'm not just painting. But at the same time, there's just a beauty of darks and chiaroscuro and kind of, whereas I can't resist it. But I think that this kind of quite analytical sort of way of looking at the world, and then there's a sort of sheer revelry in something lovely, can combine.
Yeah.
And I try to do that. And some of the paintings are more or less successful than others. Um, Sometimes I get annoyed with my illustrativeness because it's so slow. And I have all these ideas that are kind of backed up, and I love painting loose. So when I start my paintings off, they're actually very loose. my underpaintings are, I often do a lot of them by wiping out with a big rag, and then they get sort of tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And part of me would love to sort of leave them halfway because they often have the energy of the brush strokes and the, all that kind of stuff. But then I kind of screw them right down, and I'm not always sure how. I'd like to get away with screwing them down a bit less far.
Yeah, why is that, do you think? Quite a lot of guests actually say that about their practice, that they, you know, would like to leave it a little bit
A bit
more
too,
loose. Yeah.
yes.
But why, I mean, why do you feel like that?
I think because the looseness is the funnest bit of the painting. And it's the bit where you lose yourself completely and you just, you're sort of not really present. You're just letting it happen. And it's a wonderful, freeing kind of feeling.
Yeah. And do you feel like you're doing that because that's not going to be the final thing, so you can be a bit more
I
expressive?
think so, yeah. And I think in my particular case, I think people expect the tightness.
Yeah.
And so I think if I present something loose, I think it's probably a fear that they will go, oh no, I don't like that, or I don't think that looks like a Lucy Eglington,
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
that's the danger of fear.
Mm.
And I think that's a really important thing to kind of touch on because it's always present, isn't it?
Mm.
Doubt and fear and whatever
Yeah, it would be
you said.
interesting to just experiment with that idea, though, wouldn't it? Like maybe just, put one of your slightly unfinished paintings in amongst the other ones and just gauge the response.
Yes, I think I will actually because I do this thing. It's a sort of joke, but I try and have a loose day once every couple of weeks. And if it's a Monday, it's Fun Day Monday, or it's a loose day Tuesday, or whatever it is, but it's where I paint for me. I think of it as painting for me. I mean, and when I paint for I mean, all my paintings are for me, but it's an unfinished sloppiness that I let
Yeah.
myself have to you know, and I think that keeps your eye in and it keeps your gestural marks in. And
Mm.
I
Mm.
try and have little marks even in my little tiny tight little paintings and try and use the brush in a way that feels gestural. But the
Yeah.
tighter they get, the less they get like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, I have read that it's your works are described as magic realism. I'm not sure if that's a phrase you'd use yourself.
Over surrealism. But I don't even see it as magic realism. I see it as kind of realism.
Mm.
I know that's weird because obviously,
Well, the
animals.
ideas might not be realistic, but the animals are.
Yeah. I think of it as kind of narrative. I suppose magic realism is probably the best term inside established terms, if
Yeah,
you like.
if you want a term.
If you want a term, I don't like the term surrealism, and I know that that's often applied to my work, and I can see exactly why. But surrealism for me seems as though the objects are quite arbitrary and
Yeah.
too. They don't necessarily have a reason for being there together. Whereas I feel like my paintings are actually everything in there has a very specific reason to support the entirety of the narrative. So
That's right. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I can see that. But your works are
they're kind of
realistic.
surreal though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, you paint so beautifully that your animals are just incredible, and your portraiture is mind blowing. So can we just touch
love.
on quickly the portraiture?
Thank
I
you. I'm
mean,
glad you did because I love painting flesh. I love
oh
portrait.
my God, I don't know how you do that. I honestly don't. So you are painting often women, isn't
Yes,
it?
nearly always.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes nude, and you seem to love painting young women as well.
I love painting flesh and skin um and the reason I tend to paint younger people, there's something about this kind of luminous quality of skin, and particularly when it's on younger people, that and there's this sort of power and strength in youth that I find absolutely compelling, and I think we all do really, and it is beautiful. And I've painted a lot of some beautiful young women, and in some ways, as now a middle-aged woman, it's interesting because that raises questions of sexism and the sort of the gaze of others and all those other things. And is it inappropriate to paint young, beautiful people, or is that sort of like less critically interesting, or is, that it throws up all
Mm,
kinds of interesting questions as well. But
mm,
I just love painting people and their skin and the way it kind of hangs on their frames and their I just love it, and I hope to get some kind of narrative. And a lot of my paintings, they are inside a narrative structure, and I often have them looking out at the viewer. And particularly if they're a kind of beautiful and young woman, I make a real point of they look at the viewer. I don't think they're the victims of anybody's gaze. I think they gaze at us and
yeah.
challenge us in the way that we look at them. Uh,
Yes,
So I hope to get that across.
you do. And somehow you really do depict the sort of strength in the sitter.
Thank you. I like to see the old person in the young person, and kind of yeah, they're
Mm,
all of us, aren't they?
yeah, they really are. And
Yeah.
you won, or you were a finalist in the Adam Portrait
Oh yeah, I
Award.
didn't win it then. I
You
was a
didn't win,
finalist.
but
Yeah.
in the
Was
a finalist, that's great. And that was called The Cusp, which was
Yeah.
really beautiful. Did you know that person?
Yes, yes. That person's the daughter of a friend who is now all grown
Okay.
up.
Oh, it
But
was so beautiful, and what a thing for her to treasure. I love her pose actually. It's what were you actually thinking? So I'll put this in the blog, a
yeah,
photo of this work. But
okay.
she's sort of got her arms crossed over her chest and
Yeah,
is sort of draped with a red shawl, something like that, and
yes,
holding
yeah,
an apple.
yes.
So with your portraiture, I mean, it would be great for you to talk us through this particular painting,
So,
but with your
yeah.
portraiture, are you also trying to tell quite complex human stories?
Ideally, but that one I think was about, she's coming of age. And so this have known this friend for a long time, and her daughter, and this particular young woman is an extraordinary young woman, and she's strong, and even when she was little, she knew who she was, and she was a remarkable young woman. You could tell that whatever she did, she would just own it. She had all that within inside her, and you could see the woman in the child. And at that time, she was at this age where you were sort of still a child, but about to enter sort of that sort of becoming of a woman in this kind of pubescent sort of state. And I liked the idea of her as this sort of almost like Eve-like
Yeah,
figure. So she's about to enter womanhood and all of the things that that means, but still inside a child's body, but with the look in her eyes of womanhood, not as a sort of sexualized creature, but as a kind of fully expressed, quite powerful human being. And
yeah,
so I wanted to drape her because I wanted the idea that she was still a child and still a person and still naked, not as in the sort of physicality of her nakedness, but what it represents as the kind of revealed self.
mm,
Um, but obviously, I wanted to drape her to preserve her kind of modesty and dignity because, her being that age. Um, but the idea that she's on the cusp of sort of becoming this adult, and hence the apple, because it was a sort of Eve analogy, effectively.
yeah,
This
totally.
kind
I've
of
wondered that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So this kind
yeah,
of coming of wisdom and kind of growth into the world of adults, which comes with both beautiful things, but also a lot of responsibility and heaviness. So
yeah.
she's on the cusp of becoming this extraordinary person that you can see in her eyes.
You can. I was going to say that. And the expression in her eyes, it's like, it's almost like she's looking at the viewer saying, I've got this. Like,
Yeah,
I know where I'm heading.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
good.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that came across, and yeah, I try and have that in all my subjects. Is none of them are to be fucked with.
No. And you can
You know,
really see that.
they're all their own masters,
Yeah.
and no one is the victim of anybody's gaze, and they are absolutely self-determining
Yes.
persons.
Yeah, and that absolutely comes across. And sometimes you do put women with, it's like a portrait of a woman still, but with an animal as well.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
that's how I
wh-
kind of started off.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is also very striking with very simple backgrounds often, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, in this kind of bone-like kind of landscape. And I wanted the landscapes to feel timeless and not only timeless, but sort of out of time. You know, so they become all of us again.
Yeah.
Um, and I will be doing more people back in my paintings.
Your other work called Pool of Tears,
Oh yeah.
that
Okay.
is also incredible. And that's a naked young woman with
Yes.
a sort of life-size mouse and owl.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a direct line from Alice in Wonderland, in which she shrinks. So she was very distressed and distraught about having fallen into a hole, and as you might be, and cries, and then drinks the shrinking thing, and falls into a pool of her own tears that she cried when she was gigantic. Um, so it was, and then in this pool there is a mouse and a lorry, I think. That was really just about the narrative of scale and playing with that and
Mm.
kind of,
That is referencing motherhood in some way, isn't it?
yeah, it all was at that point because that was where I was. And
Mm.
I wasn't in a state of terrible sadness. So it actually wasn't intended to be a kind of sad painting whilst being called Pool of Tears. It was more
Yeah.
about how sometimes you're overwhelmed and sometimes you're not, and sometimes you're colossal and sometimes you're tiny, and how you inhabit your life.
Mm. Yeah, I can totally see that. Apart from loving painting flesh,
Yes.
why do you like to paint nudes?
Um, I mean, I think the nude form is beautiful, and I think
Yeah.
the female form is really beautiful, and they're interesting to paint. And as a woman, just the kind of tenderness of observation of someone else's naked form. Um, it's kind of, it feels emotionally intimate, not particularly sexually intimate. I think when you closely observe another person's body, and when you paint it, I think you never closely observe anything more so than when you paint it.
Mm.
You look in incredible detail at the skin, and I think as a woman, when you paint another woman's body, it sort of reveals back something to you as a woman. And you paint another woman's sort of stomach or breasts, or it's sort of very much kind of feeling your own femininity in that moment. And there's something sort
Yeah.
of vulnerable about somebody without their clothes on. And I think it's very easy to paint. You can sort of almost tell the paintings of naked women that have been painted by men, because there seems to be a different, the way the women are perhaps organized, but also the relationship to the skin or something. Uh, that's
Yeah.
not always the case. I mean, some of the most beautiful and exquisite portraits, obviously made by men, but I think there's something as a woman painting other women that is a different experience.
Yeah.
Certainly to paint. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how that comes across as being a viewer, but I just really enjoy the sense of kind of intimacy of painting another person's
Mm.
skin.
And the way you paint it is so beautifully. You're so drawn to it, but it also feels quite classical, doesn't it? I mean, it's almost
Yeah.
like you're going back to the Renaissance period of women being painted naked.
Yes, yeah. And I think, I mean, I love the sort of beauty of the flesh, and it sounds sort of, I love to paint people who are sort of quite sort of ghostly pale because they're almost a little bit see-through and slightly
Yeah,
translucent. I love
yeah.
the kind of blue notes that occur in skin, and the kind of, there's a sort of tenderness to very pale, slightly transparent people.
Mm.
I don't know what that is.
It's almost like a vulnerability.
I think it is. It's like their sort of insides are slightly visible, and then it's
Yeah,
almost like a sort of intimacy to that, or
yeah,
very kind of
yeah.
personal.
Absolutely, yeah. I see
Yeah.
that. Now we have touched a little bit on your process,
Mhm.
but it would be great for you to just unpack sort of how you approach a painting.
Yeah.
And also I'd really be interested to know if you're using photographs at all or if it's all just sketched or
Yeah.
how you build the painting
Yeah.
from the blank canvas on.
Yes. Okay. So when I have my ideas, I sketch very loosely, sort of borderline stick figures. For me, it's more about the gesture of the form and the kind of the way the idea is. So I do a bunch of little thumbnails until I'm sort of happy with that. And then I have an idea about what creatures I want, how I want them to be sort of arranged in space and things like that. And then I do have to find photos because I can't correctly make up feathers or whatever. And often I'll have the animal in a kind of weird pose that it doesn't particularly get into naturally. So I find myself in this kind of slightly sort of chimera situation. So I'll end up sort of go, oh yeah, that wing or whatever is it's kind of the angle I want, kind of twisting away. And then I'll spend a long time looking at those animals to see how their bodies go when they twist and whatnot. And so I'll have a sort of a whole set of images that I've got from the internet and printed. I have a really high quality printer at home here, which I use, just a photo printer, and then I kind of mash the animal together in my drawing on the canvas to get it sort of body doing what I want and things like that, and sort of trying to understand how the feathers are going to sit. And so it's kind of like the boring phrase because it's quite analytical because it has to feel anatomically convincing and correct and all of the rest of it, whilst without kind of killing the gesture of the.
Yeah.
So then I do that when I'm sort of happy with how I've got everything. I get a canvas or a panel or whatever I'm working on. I tend to stretch up my own canvases. I then gesso it like mad. I sand it quite a bit, so I quite like to start on a fairly fine surface. And I sometimes I put down, depending on if I'm going to start with a bit of an acrylic underpainting. If I'm starting with an acrylic underpainting, I put down a quick colour wash in a sort of neutral mid-tone, just because I like it and it helps me to kind of gauge my lights and my darks. And then I'll draw it in. If it's really fiddly, sometimes I draw it in with a bit of pencil or a bit of charcoal. And if it's not too fiddly, I will just go in with a very dilute paint and just sort of draw it in with a dilute paint. And I have a rag in my other hand, and if I don't like how something is angled, I'll do that. If it's something that has to be in exactly the right spot, I might do a very loose grid, because I want something just there because I feel like it's sort of keeping tension in the composition or something. I'll do a loose grid, and then spend hours sort of farting around with a ruler and a pencil and then I rub out the grid lines and spray it with a bit of fixative, and then I just sort of go then to going through for the darks. Usually the sort of tend to try and get the biggest darks in. The colour's not necessarily always correct, but at least try and creep up on the tone a bit. And just sort of map out the shapes, and where I've got my kind of crisp light edges, I'll sometimes go in after those next. with a bit of acrylic if I'm going to acrylic undercoat. Um, and sometimes I push it quite far in acrylic, sometimes not.
So
Um,
you can lay down acrylic and then go on top with oil.
yes, you can. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
not the other way around. So
Yeah, no. And you
yeah,
just like, is that just purely for how quickly it dries?
yes, yeah, yeah, it is. And if I'm sort of doing a painting where I'm not exactly sure where everything's going to go, I like the acrylic because it dries quite quickly. And then I can move it quickly as well, and I'm very quick and very loose. So I haven't lost too much of a kind of time investment if I suddenly need to move something 3 inches to the left or whatever like that. Um, so it feels like a quite nice kind of low stakes way of beginning. Sometimes I go in with oil and I cover the whole thing in oil and I'll wipe back to find the painting. But that's obviously slower because then once you've got that sort of wiped out undercoat, you have to then leave that for days and days and days before you can come back and
Mm,
go on it again. Um,
yeah.
and then I just come through, I paint in layers quite thinly. So I'll come through progressively, like many times in layers, kind of building up color and tone and, you know, sort of like that, really. I use a lot of
Mm,
glaze. I use a lot of transparent paints. Um, and that's why I think I like a lot of sort of rich, transparent darks. And when I've got sort of strong colors, like, for example, those flamingos and stuff, obviously those are reds, so there aren't so many good transparent reds. But then I try to tend to glaze over with something transparent and rich, just to add
mm,
that kind of depth of glaze,
yeah.
lusciousness into my darks.
Yeah. And it helps with the realism, I think, doesn't it, when you're adding so many layers?
I think it does, yeah, yeah, because you can sort of find your way into it, and it's quite forgiving as well. So you don't have to kind of, if you're a bit tentative at the start because you haven't necessarily pinned down where everything is, it's sort of easier to kind of shove the layers around, if you know,
Mm, yeah.
because they're not so sort of committed.
And we were talking earlier when we weren't recording
Mm.
about your commissions. So you do complete a lot of commissions.
I do a lot of commission work, yeah.
Yeah, and you do encourage it, don't you? It's something that you enjoy.
I love it. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
Because it's quite, some artists really don't love it. It's interesting, isn't it?
I can see once or twice I've kind of don't loved it, but I really like it because you know that you're creating something that is really meaningful to the person that you're creating it for, and because I create kind of narrative work, you're often then people tell you their own narrative. And I think there's something really quite wonderful of sort of meeting another human being and hearing their kind of story, that and being able to then kind of use that narrative as a kind of basis for your own work, and sort of it's a challenge, and I quite enjoy the creative challenge of that, and being able to make their own narrative into something that's kind of seen and has a
Yeah.
physicality to it, and so I really enjoy it. I enjoy the hardness of it.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's an interesting kind of mix, isn't it, with your imagination. So you're not coming up with the initial concept, but then you're still taking it to a place that works for you.
yes, yeah, but you often are coming up with the initial, in the sense that they just say, "I want a painting," and then you talk to them about their life, and so you usually get to have the initial.
Okay.
Occasionally they'll go, "I want this," and then sometimes I kind of say, "Oh, I can't make that work," or
Yeah.
I just can't. It just doesn't
Mm.
work with me for whatever
So
reason.
you're basically interpreting something that's personal to them.
Yes, yeah, but I work with them, so I want to make sure that they're really happy with the idea
Mm.
and how it's
Yeah.
developing. They usually talk a bit about their lives, but then I try and understand what it is that they've liked about my work, because there are so many different sort of threads and aspects to my work that I might think that they're liking one thing, but actually they're over here. So I try to understand what that is. And then
Mm.
I'll sort of say, look, can I go away and sort of come back? So then I sort of go away and I come back with some sort of little drawn ideas, and I talk them through. I usually present them with 3 or 4 ideas, and it'll often be something that I've kind of been thinking about slightly anyway, because it's the quite universal kind of narratives I think that we often have. And they will often respond quite strongly to one thing. And then we'll talk more about what's appealing about that. And then I'll talk about my ideology about that. And then I'll go away and I'll sort of come back with more ideas. And then they'll really sort of talk about aspects of it that they like and that they don't like, and sort of get it quite refined. And then I'll often show them like a very loose sketch, but I'll kind of colour it in with some pastel or some watercolour or something, just to sort of fill it out and describe it as I go. And then by then usually they're really happy and go along, and I sort of paint it, and sometimes they want to see photos while I'm going, and sometimes they just want to get surprised. So, you know, when the client comes to see the finished painting, and it's a wonderful moment because they often will have a cry and a really emotional response, and be quite moved, I think, by their experience of the journey of being involved in a creative process like that. And you've got something
that's
that
beautiful.
feels like an heirloom, and it's really wonderful. I try and have a commission on the go, but something that I'm just painting for me, as it were.
And we were talking earlier about how you do paint quite slowly, which, you know, makes sense with the sort of level of detail in your work.
Yes.
So how do you manage looking after galleries, and how do you actually work towards a show? Because I imagine that would be really difficult.
It is actually quite difficult to work towards a show. I'm terrible at managing galleries because I'm horribly disorganized, and but so I have work in the Parnell Gallery. I have work in a gallery in the UK in Bath. I have work in the artist room in Dunedin, and Boyd Dunlop in Hastings as well. And but it's hard to make enough work to have a show, and they're all sort of saying, hey, do you want to have a solo? And that's great, and I'd love to, but often I find that when it comes to it, I don't have enough, because as a working artist without a sort of extra income source, you know, I'm a single mum, you need to pay the bills, and so it's very difficult as a slow painter to stock up enough work to get to the year without having sold anything. So I tend to sort of do the commissions to keep the bills paid, and then I try and kind of store up work. You know, because like one for summer, one for winter kind of thing. As I go, and that is not always successful. And I've had to postpone shows and delay shows and things like that because I haven't had enough work to do that. So it's the necessity of meeting the bills. You know,
It's a tricky one.
It was wonderful in the old days when people had a patron, or you've got a wealthy partner, or you've got some family money, or you've got, you know, but I'm not in any of those situations. And so I just have to try to make it work.
Yeah. And you have to be realistic.
I think so. Yeah.
I totally get that. But then your work sells incredibly well. So you also don't sort of stockpile work because you make work and it sells often.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I'm very lucky to sell everything I make, actually.
When you make those sales, is that quite often just through your own social media and that sort of thing, or is it through galleries more?
They all sell in the galleries, and certainly the artist room in Dunedin have a kind of wait list of people who are interested. So I will sort of say, oh, I've finished something, and send her down an image on the easel, and she'll sell it before it's even got to the, you know, into the cardboard or whatever to get shipped.
Wow.
So that's pretty amazing. It's possible that my prices are too low because she does sell them very quickly.
Well, you probably have room to put your prices up for sure.
I think that's possible. Yeah, and my prices are not particularly high, actually. In fact, they're quite low considering the amount of work that I put into my work.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Managing galleries in some ways and keeping up with expectations of work.
You know, you artists often present themselves. I suppose that we all like to present ourselves in our best light, but I think there's a sort of a bit of an aspect of kind of smoke and mirrors involved with the way that artists often present themselves, and they sort of present themselves as terribly successful and kind of untouchable, and I don't think that's true. I think it's rubbish. We're humans with a job, and we're very lucky to have this incredible job, but it's often an insecure living, and it's just trying to do our best like everybody.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I think if one of the nicest things about this podcast for your listeners is that you actually seeing that artists are just real people like everybody else, with the same concerns and the same worries, and
Yeah. Yeah. It's real life.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get on to the questions. What would you say would be one of the most significant moments in your career?
I think it's probably quite subtle. I don't think it would necessarily have been a kind of ding moment, but I think the moment when you decide to start having belief in your own stuff that you're doing, taking yourself seriously enough that you can say, yes, I'm an artist, making that kind of leap inside yourself. I think for me, it's not about what other people think about what you're doing or whatever, but it's actually how you think about what you're doing, and the shift from not sure to sure. I would say that
And what has being an artist taught you about life?
everything and life teaches you about being an artist. I don't think you can separate the two. I think it teaches you a lot about how to be comfortable with vulnerability, how to be unafraid of your own ideas a little bit, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How to be kind of tender and strong at the same time. And I don't know if when you realize that about your painting, it's because you've already realized that about life. And then it shows up in your painting and it reflects it back to you. I read a beautiful quote the other day, actually. I wrote it down for this and it was actually from a writer. And Flannery O'Connor, I actually don't know who that is, but that was I write to discover what I know. And I think sometimes your painting reveals back to you things that you didn't know you knew.
Yeah. And what do you find most challenging about being an artist?
Oh, sometimes when you're tired and you have this sort of blip in your faith about, the self-doubt, the worries about income, it's not a secure, and I mean emotionally secure as well as kind of physically secure, because sometimes you're in love with your work and it's wonderful and it's all going swimmingly, but there are other times where you just feel quite, it kind of goes in waves and you're sort of at the bottom of one wave and you're sort of waiting for the next wave, and that's hard, I find it.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you do have a few things. This is slightly going sideways, but you do have other things that you do apart from painting. So you were telling me earlier that you are starting to make jewelry, which
Oh
is
yeah.
very exciting. And I absolutely love your ring that you're
Thank
wearing.
you. So I've been doing silversmith. It's my hobby on the side of my job. So it's my
Yeah.
jobby. um,
Yeah.
but I love it because it's so making hard things with your hands. It's so different from the delicacy of painting. But I just
Yes.
made this, which is my it's a Barbie. I'm going to make a bunch more because I think it's so it's a ring made of silver, but so I made that to fit around this piece of a Barbie's eye, which I've cut out, which I sort of, everyone has these mixed relationships with Barbies because of their horrendous kind of female toxicity. But at the same time, people kind of love them, and
Mm. And they're very sort of iconic,
they are
it's
iconic.
an iconic figure.
It
Love it
really
or
is.
hate it. Yeah.
And I
Yes.
quite like her on my 50-year-old woman's maker's hand.
Absolutely. It seems to
So
fit so beautifully. And you've actually cut off the doll. So it's like it's the eye and the eyebrow from the actual
Oh yes,
doll.
yes, yeah.
And
Uh,
then the two little like diamonds or
yes,
crystals like tears. Yeah,
yes.
so send me a photo and we'll put that on the
I
blog
will,
so
thank
people
you.
can see it.
The next one I'm doing has lips, all those kind of horrid plastic smiles.
Yes.
I think they're fascinating. So I,
You'll have to put a boob on there. That'd be
oh, I
quite
can't
funny.
wait. The thing about the
Yeah.
boobs is they're quite big and they have no nipples, obviously. So I might have to employ some more sparkly stones. And
Yeah.
I love it on my aging hand. And it's kind of it's a working hand.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
no accident that I made it for my middle finger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fuck you, beauty
I
stand.
love that. That's so good. But I mean, that work is very cool. So I hope that you keep going with that
Thank
hobby.
you. Yeah, I think I will actually. I'm just
Yeah.
having a sort of fun in the evenings when I'm tired of painting. So it's
Yeah. It's a lovely combination, isn't it? That's what I find with my shell rings that I make. It's sort of a mindless therapy in some ways for me.
yes, yeah, and then forming things with your hands like that is
Yeah.
the silversmithing is great because you got a blowtorch and it's saws and you feel really kind of manually competent,
Yeah. Yeah. I
which
can
is a very
imagine.
satisfying feeling. And I
Yeah.
know I'm dexterous and I paint and everything, but it's quite nice to make these very
Yeah.
tangible objects.
What is coming up next for you, Lucy, do you think?
Um, I think I want to start creeping some human figures back into my work because I just love doing them. And I'm interested in making the work a bit looser, it's as we talked about earlier, and seeing how that will go and perhaps revealing a bit more of the kind of layeredness because my work is so kind of layered. I mean, it's physically layered, but it's kind of emotionally and intellectually kind of layered. And I want to make work that perhaps, as I was just talking about, the idea of things casting their own shadows
Mm.
inside. So I think something along those lines, kind of making the because I love that, we construct our own reality, and I want to still tell the stories that I tell, the way that I tell them, but I would like parts of them to seem more constructed and
Yeah.
the idea that they're constructed to be a bit more obvious. I'm not 100% sure what that is going to look like, whether it's about making parts of the painting more realized or less realized so that it becomes obvious that it's kind of painted or casting shadows on things. I like the idea of shadows. Um, it could almost paint a whole series on shadow because it's some metaphorical shadows. Realities can sort of coexist, and how one member of the separation had sort of almost gone back through history and sort of almost like re-wallpapered the hall of their own story. So these constructed narratives are really interesting, and the diorama seems to me the perfect example of a constructed narrative
Yeah.
enclosed. So I'm
Yeah.
most tempted to make paintings, but have them framed in such a way as they look like
3D.
those dioramas. It's a bit more literal.
What would you say
Oh,
to your younger artistic self?
another quote. And I've sort of bastardized this quote from a completely different quote, but it's turned into the way that I say it now to myself is buy your art, make the unseen seen. Because whatever your art is, whether it's writing or dance or photography, or art in my case, is painting, make the unseen seen. I mean, if it was true advice to the future self, just find a place to put aside the judgment, the self-judgment, the perceived imaginary judgment of others, the actual judgment of others. Just find a place to put it and put it over there.
Yeah, put the lid on.
Put the lid on. It's so hard though, isn't it? When you're just
Yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things about, getting older and you are, I think it is easier to view life like that when you're a bit older because for whatever reason you start caring less about what other people think
yeah,
and
yeah,
have more, if you're lucky, have more sort of what is it, more belief in your own things that are important to you,
Mm.
and that is a beautiful thing about getting older.
It really is. I know people who sort of hate the idea of turning 50. I loved turning 50. It was like you could just let go of a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah.
wonderful.
It's empowering. Yeah,
It really is.
yeah.
It really is. And didn't understand that until it happened to me, and I'm very grateful for it.
It has been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank
My
you
goodness.
so much for having me on. I hope that my answers weren't too convoluted.
No, they were fascinating, and I just find you so incredible and inspiring, and it's
It
been
was
lovely to meet you. And
really
look,
lovely to meet you.
it's been such a lovely time, and I hope to meet you in the flesh some stage.
That would be fantastic. I would love that very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.